Sangye Jutong Zogi Chonam La Jongchu Bardo Dani Gapsuji Dagi Jinzogi Pesanangi Joda Benjir Sangye Jobarejo Sangye Jutong Zogi Chonam La Jongchu Bardo Dani Gapsuji Dagi Jensogi Pesanangi Drura Benjir Sangi Tubarishom Gijaton Zogi Jonam Lai Jongju Bardurani Gapsuji Dagi Jensogi Pesanangi Dura Benjir Sangi Dubarishom Chom Dende Jombe Yong La Jazerom Kongi Roger Jimne Jinde Nita Namda Rapserwe Jinye Dungun Tiji Tiji Niki Dukarek Pamsen Dag Sipet Sanrar Marig Menton Donye Gizirwe Droto Kula Bujik Darsa Yondak Dujo Yongdan Zong Druk Dari Jedron Yamon Niron Leki Jadro Drotejing Marig Mensan Donye Nyugo Jinye Jutere Jinam Dune Dajing Sachu Dasa Yonta Luzo Gatsa Dubego Hag Tudong Juni Gendre Dagru Manta Jombe Yong La Du Tsedenge Ganra Busergi Dagra Timung Mambarapsane Katong Danger Donglong Dobai Lodra Bubeno Water Dosa.
Hello, everyone. We are currently studying the Entry to the State of a Pandita, written by the first Mipham Rinpoche. We are currently focusing on the first of the three parts, which covers the 10 themes. These 10 themes remedy 10 different ways of grasping a self. We're focusing on the first of the the first of the 10 themes. This theme is that of the aggregates, which remedies grasping a self as singular and indivisible. We've covered the aggregate of forms, of sensations, of distinctions, and we're currently studying the aggregate of conditioning phenomena. There are two parts. The first part concerns conditioning phenomena associated by similarity with mind. That's what we're currently focusing on. We already covered the 5 omnipresent mental events, the 5 mental events that determine a specific object. During this course, we concluded the 11 virtuous mental events. We're working on the afflictive obscurations, 6 root afflictive obscurations, and we're currently working on the 20 related afflictive obscurations. Yesterday, during our session, we looked at the mental events of hypocrisy, lack of shame, lack of restraint, deceit, greed, self-centeredness, mistrust, laziness, negligence, forgetting, and non-vigilance. Today we'll continue with the 18th. There are 3 left to finish the list of 20. The 18th is torpor. In Tibetan. The root text says, torpor belongs to the class of lack of knowledge. Due to its aspects of physical and mental weight, it leads to retreat toward within and makes one incapable of remaining with a point of focus. The mind is no longer workable. It is the support for afflictive obscurations. Khenpo Chodrak simply says that torpor is a kind of heaviness that manifests in terms of body and mind. He says that it's not sleep or sleepiness, it's feeling physically and mentally heavy. The root text says that torpor belongs to the class of lack of knowledge. And this heaviness leads to retreat within, makes one incapable of remaining with a focal point. The mind is no longer workable. And on this basis, afflictive obscurations can arise. An example, one of our own examples, is that we often experience torpor after a meal, like right about now. When we've eaten well, also when it's warm out, and sometimes when it's a bit dark, we have a hard time. We might try to meditate, and in fact, we feel so full that we experience this retreat of the body and mind inward. We can't focus on our breathing. Mind isn't workable, and we can't focus. That's torpor. The following mental event is agitation. Rupa in Tibetan. The root text says, agitation belongs to the class of desire attachment that pursues pleasant labels. It leads to a mind that is not workable nor calm because it is distracted due to an object. It is an obstacle to mental calm. This concerns being excited, thinking about something pleasant. That's why agitation belongs to the class of desire attachment. We have an inner discussion about this pleasant object, and mind is not calm. And the example that Khenpo Chodrak gives, and which is also given in Khenpo Nuden's commentary, is I'm thinking about something that I did in the past that I enjoyed and that I'd like to do again. Khenpo Chodrak gives the example of a game we may have played, which was fun, and that we'd like to play again. I develop a certain excitement or agitation, thinking about playing this game again, and I organize all the details in my mind, who I'm going to invite, when and where we're going to do it, etc. My mind is preoccupied by this game. It's no longer workable. It can't be used for anything else, and it's not calm. If I think about this game while I'm meditating, this prevents mind from remaining focused. That's agitation. Next comes to the 20th and last, related non-virtuous mental event, which is complete distraction. Nampar Yengwa. The root text says, complete distraction belongs to the classes of the three poisons. The mind moves and wanders toward an object. Complete distraction prevents it from remaining concentrated on the focal point of virtue. It can be divided into outer distraction, inner distraction, distraction related to labels, and others. Complete distraction belongs to the classes of desire attachment, aversion, and lack of knowledge. Indeed, the object of this distraction can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Due to complete distraction, we can't focus clearly. Khenpo says we can't clearly decide where we want to go or what we want to do. We move from one thing to another. Complete distraction, like agitation, prevents us from developing the ability to remain in a calm state, developing shamatha. In the Mahayana Sutras, there are 6 types of complete distraction that are listed. Distraction due to outer objects. This concerns the 5 sense objects. We're distracted due to our interaction with one or several of them. We move from one outer object to another. For example, we hear birds singing and we focus on that. Then we see a fly going by and we focus on that. Then someone coughs and we focus on that. Then something itches, etc. Then there is inner distraction. Here Khenpo says, for example, we're at home and we think things like, I could really take a nap right now. And then we do it. Or we think about doing this or that, and we do that instead of meditating. And he gives 2 examples that can appear within the context of retreat. We see excitement or agitation again. He says that it can happen that while we're meditating, we remember pleasant moments, thinking about I went to visit this country, I went to this beach. And Khenpo says that this often happens, or particularly happens, when we're in retreat somewhere pleasant, when food is good, it's summertime, we feel good, and we think about other nice moments. That's one example, the example that Khenpo gives for agitation. Then he talks about torpor. Which can also arise within a retreat. For example, once again, if it's summer, it's nice out, the food's good, and torpor happens. We feel full. Can also happen in the winter time when the heat's good, the heating's on. Instead of remaining concentrated, we tend to fall asleep. And Khenpo says that agitation and torpor were the main obstacles for him if he's doing a shamatha or a yidam retreat. This brings us to the third type of distraction. Distraction due to focusing on a specific characteristic. That was the old translation. There's a more recent translation. Distraction due to labels. We focus on a particular aspect of our lives, on how to obtain wealth or fame, on something that might occur in the future related to that. Khenpo gives the example of thinking about winning the lottery. If I win the lottery, I do this, I do that. Or if I did this or that, I get famous. And then we make plans to become famous. We project ourselves into the future instead of developing mental calm. That was the third form of distraction. Then comes the fourth. Distraction due to grasping harmful states. Or distraction related to a negative state. Another more recent alternate. These states are said to be harmful or negative because they're based on self-grasping and grasping possessions. Khenpo Chodrak says this concerns thinking about being someone important, thinking that we're incredible, wonderful. The main cause of this is grasping and considering an identity. Once we think me, we abide in this view of considering ourselves to be important. And in the older translation, there was a note that we try to do things to attract attention to ourselves. We're solely focused on ourselves and no one else. Our only interest is in becoming an important person. Uh-oh. My paper got cut off. Okay, here comes the next part. Distraction due to giving up the Bodhisattva principle, or a newer translation, distraction of mental engagement. This specifically concerns Mahayana practitioners. What does this consist in? This concerns wanting to actualize liberation for oneself. And then, in thinking this way, mind takes the direction of the listener vehicle. It's the fifth type of distraction. And the sixth and final type of distraction where we think about nothing. Khenpo says this is a state of mind where we're zoning out. We don't think about anything specific. We don't think about or remember anything particular. And he says this happens often. Distraction concludes the list of related afflictive mental events. There's a conclusion concerning this list. Such are these 20. Because they belong to the classes of root afflictive obscurations, and because they are related to them, they are called the related afflictive obscurations. Khenpo explains that in the past, sometimes people mistakenly thought that this term related meant that these afflictive obscurations are not as strong as the root afflictive obscurations, but this is not the case. For example, with aggression, we can see that it's even stronger than anger because it leads us to hitting people. And the definition says that it's an intensification of anger. So this term related does not mean that these afflictive obscurations are weaker or less intense than the root ones. As we saw at the beginning of the list, this term related refers to the fact that the root afflictive obscurations have their own nature and their own mental substance, while related afflictive obscurations don't have their own nature. They have the same substance as the root afflictive obscurations. Because they have the same substance as the root afflictive obscurations, they belong to classes of root afflictive obscurations to which or with which they are related. And in this way, they're simply designations. In this list of 20, there are nevertheless 4 exceptions of related afflictive obscurations that have their own mental substance. That concerns lack of shame, lack of restraint, mistrust, and laziness. These 4 related afflictive obscurations have their own mental substance, but they can also be designations and belong to classes of afflictive obscurations. That depends on the situation. That's what Khenpo explained. We asked Kalzung Punso a question concerning the root afflictive obscurations. He gave a pretty evocative example, which I'll share in case it can help. He said that the related afflictive obscurations, in relation to the root afflictive obscurations, it's like a monk in relation to a human being. A monk has the same substance as a human being. Substance is that of a human being, but the monk has particular characteristics. Nevertheless, his substance is not different than the substance of a human being. So that covers the related afflictive obscurations. That concludes the list of non-virtuous mental events. This brings us to the list of 4 variable mental events. The root text says, the 4 variable mental events are the following. So next come the 4 variable mental events. These 4 mental events are said to be variable because depending on the motivation connected with them, they can be virtuous, harmful, or non-virtuous, or non-specific. Non-specific meaning neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. The first of these 4 is sleep, Ni in Tibetan. The root text says, sleep, on the basis of its cause, brings about retreat from the consciousnesses of the 5 doors toward within, without considering here the differences between sleep that is virtuous or non-virtuous, appropriate or inappropriate, at an acceptable hour or not, and others. It belongs to the class of lack of knowledge and is the support for loss of activity. There are different causes for falling asleep. The first is physical fatigue. The second cause is having eaten food that's too rich. And the next cause, Khenpo explains, is night falling, natural moment for falling asleep. The text says that this mental event brings about retreat from the consciousnesses of the 5 doors toward within. When we talk about the consciousnesses of the 5 doors, this concerns the 5 sense consciousnesses. During sleep, the 5 sense consciousnesses retreat toward within. They're no longer active, they're not functioning. And sleep is the support for loss of activity. Of course, when we're sleeping, we don't have any further activity. And then there's regret. The root text says, regret is rumination due to certain malcontent regarding what has happened in the past. It cuts off stability of mind. Here, what Khenpo explained is that in this situation, the person remembers an action that they've committed in the past. Then they ruminate about this action due to malcontent, lack of contentment about what happened. And in this way, they regret their action. Due to this, mind can't rest in its natural state. It's cut off from stability, mental stability, as the text says. Regret is a variable mental event because it can be virtuous, non-virtuous, or non-specific, depending on the related motivation. If we think about an example of virtuous regret, not an example that Khenpo gave, but one that we came up with. The other day I was exasperated and I spoke fairly meanly to somebody, and now I'm not very happy about that. I'm ruminating about it and I regret it. Regretting a non-virtuous action like that is virtuous. An example of non-virtuous regret. The other day I gave money to somebody who needed it, and today I don't have enough money to go on vacation, so I'm unhappy about that. Ruminating about it, and I regret it. Regretting a virtuous action is non-virtuous. Regretting a virtuous action is non-virtuous. And then comes the third variable mental event, course examination, Dhagpo in Tibetan. The root text says, course examination is a formulation by the mental aspect that is seeking of the thing it is focusing on based on impulse and discernment. It is only crudely grasping an approximation of the thing. It is like simply grasping a form in the distance without differentiating between a clay bowl and a vase. So what is course examination? It is a mental event that belongs to discernment that determines the object of focus without grasping it precisely. The object is not fully determined following course examination. It's like a bowl or a vase that's off in the distance, and we only grasp the form, but we can't determine what the object is. And the text says, it appears on the basis of impulse and discernment. Impulse is one of the 5 omnipresent mental events. And discernment is one of the 5 mental events that determines a specific object. As we saw, the 10 that are 5 omnipresent mental events and the 5 that determine a specific object are present for the mind to be able to focus on an object and determine it. But here, there's simply, here only impulse and discernment are named. Mind is oriented toward the objects and tries to completely discern what the object is, but it only crudely grasps the object, only obtains a general image of the object. This brings us to the 4th variable mental event, subtle analysis. Chupa in Tibetan. The root text says, subtle analysis is a precise grasp arising from decomposition by the mental aspect that examines the particularity of this thing in a detailed way based on impulse and discernment. For example, it grasps a vase being new and uncracked. Khenpo didn't give commentary on this point, this mental event. Just from reading this sentence, we can try to understand it by ourselves. That's what we try to do. What we understood when reading this sentence is that on the basis of impulse, the first omnipresent mental event, mind moves and it goes toward an object, moves not physically but in a theoretical sense. And then, due to this variable mental event of subtle analysis, and due to discernment, mind can completely determine the object. So due to course examination, first, mind grasps a general overview of the object, and then, due to subtle analysis, mind dissects, decomposes, takes apart the particularities of this thing and it grasps it in a specific way, in a more subtle way. And then we have knowledge of the object that is vaster and more detailed than with course examination on its own. We'll be able to see that it's a new and uncracked vase, as in the example given. To conclude these variable mental events, the root text says, according to different motivations and thoughts, these mental events can be virtuous, harmful, or undetermined. Therefore, they are called variable mental events. As we said before, depending on the motivation, the different thoughts that are present in the mind, these mental events can be virtuous, harmful, or non-specific. I suggest we take a short silent break.
Donc si vous reprenez le plan qui est à la fin du texte racine, donc vous allez voir que dans les conditionnants associés par similarité à l'esprit, donc on a vu la présentation brève, on a vu l'explication détaillée avec les 5 événements de l'esprit omniprésent, les 5 événements de l'esprit qui déterminent un objet spécifique, les 11 événements de l'esprit vertueux, les 6 obscurcissements affligeants racines, les 20 obscurcissements affligeants apparentés, les 4 variables. Et donc on arrive au résumé, la troisième partie des conditionnants, de la partie qui traite des conditionnants associés par similarité à l'esprit. Le résumé ou le sens résumé. Et donc il est dit dans le texte, à travers ces principaux événements de l'esprit, il a juste été enseigné de façon générale les particularités de la grande base de l'esprit et des événements de l'esprit vertueux et nuisibles. Il faut savoir par ailleurs qu'en raison des différentes manières de saisir... Non, on va rester là, pardon. Donc c'est juste cette phrase pour l'instant. Donc à travers ces principaux événements de l'esprit, il a juste été enseigné de façon générale les particularités de la grande base de l'esprit et des événements de l'esprit vertueux et nuisibles. Donc cela conclut la liste des 51 événements de l'esprit. Donc si on récapitule, donc il y avait d'abord 5 événements de l'esprit omniprésents et 5 événements de l'esprit qui déterminent un objet spécifique. Et donc on avait vu que ces événements de l'esprit étaient présentés comme étant la grande base de l'esprit par l'Abhidharma Kosha. Donc toute connaissance est composée de ces 10. Et ces 10 ne sont que des mouvements ou des fonctionnements du courant d'esprit fondamental. Ils ne sont pas séparés du courant d'esprit fondamental. Le courant d'esprit fondamental et sa capacité continue à la connaissance, en association avec ces 10 événements de l'esprit, peut interagir avec les objets de connaissance. Parce que seul le courant d'esprit fondamental ne se focalise pas sur un objet. C'est uniquement en association avec ces 10 événements de l'esprit qu'il peut interagir avec les objets de connaissance. Et sur cette base peuvent apparaître les 11 événements de l'esprit vertueux et les 26 événements de l'esprit non vertueux. Et ces événements de l'esprit vertueux et non vertueux, ils orientent ou ils colorent le courant d'esprit fondamental et les 10 premiers événements de l'esprit. Et eux aussi sont des mouvements ou des fonctionnements du courant d'esprit. Et ils s'ajoutent aux 10 premiers événements de l'esprit et au courant d'esprit. Et le courant d'esprit, en fait, il est naturellement non défini, c'est-à-dire ni vertueux ni non vertueux. Et pour qu'un instant de connaissance vertueux ou non vertueux se développe, il est nécessaire qu'un ou plusieurs des 11 événements de l'esprit vertueux ou des 26 non vertueux colorent le courant d'esprit. Et les événements de l'esprit vertueux et non vertueux ont une plus grande force que les 10 premiers parce qu'ils rendent le courant d'esprit et les 10 premiers événements de l'esprit vertueux ou non vertueux. Je répète peut-être. Les événements de l'esprit vertueux et non vertueux les événements de l'esprit vertueux et non vertueux ont une plus grande force que les 10 premiers parce qu'ils rendent le courant d'esprit et ses 10 vertueux ou non vertueux. Donc ces événements mentaux, ces événements de l'esprit vertueux et non vertueux influencent complètement notre esprit et donc nos actions par la suite. Et donc enfin, il y avait les 4 événements de l'esprit variables. Donc eux peuvent être vertueux, non vertueux ou non définis selon les motivations et les pensées qui leur sont sous-jacentes. Et il est dit ensuite dans le texte, il faut savoir par ailleurs qu'en raison de différentes manières de saisir propres aux impulsions, aux distinctions, etc., il existe de très nombreuses catégories d'événements de l'esprit, telles que la tristesse et la gaieté, la difficulté et la facilité, la patience et l'impatience, etc. Ces événements de l'esprit sont les conditionnants associés par similarité à l'esprit. Donc la liste qu'on a vue, c'est une liste principale, mais il y a d'autres événements de l'esprit qui sont éprouvés par l'esprit. Cette liste qu'on a vue n'est pas exhaustive. Donc comme c'est dit dans la phrase, il y a également la tristesse et la gaieté, la difficulté, la facilité, etc. Et donc nous avons fini les conditionnants associés par similarité à l'esprit. Et donc on va commencer les conditionnants non associés par similarité à l'esprit.
Voilà, donc on arrive à la deuxième grande partie, qui sont les conditionnants non associés par similarité. Donc, on avait vu que les conditionnants associés par similarité, ils partageaient 5 similarités avec les consciences. Et là, en ce qui concerne les conditionnants non associés par similarité, ils ne partagent pas ces 5 similarités avec les consciences. Donc, conditionnants non associés par similarité, c'est la traduction du tibétain Tsumden Minduje. Et ça veut dire littéralement conditionnant qui ne possède pas les similarités. Le texte racine dit les phénomènes qui ne sont pas des conditionnants comme les événements de l'esprit, mais qui appartiennent nécessairement aux phénomènes conditionnés et qui ne peuvent être inclus ni dans la matière, ni dans la connaissance, sont dits être les conditionnants non associés par similarité à l'esprit. Donc, ces conditionnants non associés sont des phénomènes conditionnés. Ça veut dire qu'ils sont issus du rassemblement de causes et de conditions et ils ne peuvent être classés ni dans la matière ni dans l'esprit, esprit ou connaissance. Le texte racine continue. Il faut comprendre que les trois, la matière, la connaissance et les conditionnants non associés, contiennent tous les phénomènes conditionnés. Ce qui est formé de particules est la matière. Ce qui est animé et connaissant est la connaissance. Tous les phénomènes conditionnés qui ne sont ni l'un ni l'autre sont les conditionnants non associés par similarité. Donc, tous les phénomènes du samsara sont des phénomènes conditionnés. Et ces phénomènes conditionnés peuvent être de trois sortes. Il y a les phénomènes qui sont matière. C'est ce qui est formé de particules. Donc la matière, elle est inanimée et elle ne peut pas connaître. Elle ne peut pas former des concepts, etc. Ensuite, on a les phénomènes qui sont esprit ou connaissance. Donc l'esprit, il est animé ou clair. Aujourd'hui, on traduit plutôt par clair. Avant, on disait animé. Et deuxièmement, il est connaissant. Il est une capacité continue à connaître. Et troisièmement, on a les phénomènes qui ne peuvent être classés ni dans la matière, ni dans la connaissance, qui ne sont ni l'un ni l'autre. Et c'est là, il s'agit de conditionnants non associés par similarité, ce deuxième type de conditionnant. Il y a ici deux façons d'expliquer ces phénomènes. Il y a le point de vue vaibhashika, c'est une des deux écoles de pensée du Theravada, du véhicule fondamental. Et donc pour eux, ces phénomènes ont leur substance propre. C'est-à-dire, ils ont la capacité d'accomplir une fonction. Ils sont efficients. Et selon le point de vue des autres écoles, c'est-à-dire Sautrantika, qui est la deuxième école du Theravada, et aussi des écoles du Mahayana, donc pour eux, ce ne sont pas des phénomènes substantiels, ce ne sont que des simples désignations sur quelque chose ou sur des situations où à la fois l'esprit et la matière sont impliqués. Donc, selon les Vaibhashika, il y a les substances matérielles, il y a les substances de l'esprit et les substances des conditionnants non associés, alors que pour les autres écoles de pensée, il n'y a que la substance matérielle et ou, selon, la substance de l'esprit. Les conditionnants non associés ne sont que des désignations sur des situations où à la fois l'esprit et la matière sont impliqués. Et le texte présente d'abord une liste de 14 conditionnants non associés par similarité. Cette liste est commune aux deux traditions, Theravada et Mahayana, et on la trouve dans l'Abhidhamma Kosha et dans l'Abhidhamma Samuccaya. Et ensuite, on va voir une liste supplémentaire de 10 qui vient seulement de l'Abhidhamma Samuccaya. Et ça fait au total 24 conditionnants non associés par similarité qui sont présentés dans ce texte. Voilà ce qu'on avait prévu pour aujourd'hui. Donc si vous avez des questions.
Oh no, I don't think the translation's been. To come back to what Olivier laid out concerning the 5 omnipresent mental events and 5 conditioning phenomena that determine the presence of an object, are these 10 present concerning during dreamless sleep, during coma, and during meditation free from perception. So we'll go over them one by one. First, there's sleep. Try to answer. Not sure if I have the answers, but let's try. Sleep is, it's said that the 5 sense consciousnesses are in retreat, but it doesn't say that the mental consciousness is in retreat. So mental consciousness can function, apparently. If it's functioning, then objects can be determined during a dream. So the 10 are present, but during dreamless sleep. So if it's dreamless sleep, that your idea is that the mental consciousness isn't functioning. It's not said that during sleep the sixth consciousness doesn't function. What you're describing is a state in which the sixth consciousness isn't functioning. I don't know if dreamless sleep involves this consciousness not functioning. In any case, if we're talking about sleep in relation to what's defined here, the sixth consciousness is functioning. It's not said that the sixth consciousness isn't functioning. So if it's functioning, then there is the possibility of determining objects. I can't really answer more than that. But we'll see them after, but there are states that are described where the sixth consciousness is not functioning. These are very specific states. Meditative concentrations, when all thoughts are blocked. That leads to being reborn in various levels of the form realm, where only the seventh and eighth consciousnesses are functioning. And it's said that even in these states, around the seventh and eighth consciousnesses, the 5 omnipresent mental events are present. However, those that determine an object are not. But there's still 4 afflictive obscurations that are present around the seventh consciousness, attachment to self, etc. It's not said that the 5 that determine an object are present in this case when the seventh consciousness is functioning. So I'd say the 5 that determine an object are not present in these samadhis. That was one of your questions, right? I was thinking about the idea that they were always present in an instant of mind, and then I was wondering if that was the case for these specific instances. It means that they're present almost all the time, except in certain situations. So yes, more or less, the 5 omnipresent mental events are present around all the consciousnesses. The 5 sensory consciousnesses, the 6th consciousness, the 7th consciousness, and the 8th consciousness. So even when the sense consciousnesses aren't operating, even concerning the case of an arhat, when only the 8th consciousness is functioning, these 5 omnipresent mental events are still there, but not the 5 that determine an object. Concerning the variable mental events in regards to sleep, so if they're variable, this means they can be virtuous, non-virtuous, or non-specific. I'm thinking about myself. I think that when I'm sleeping, everything that can happen, it's not necessarily virtuous. I'm not necessarily in control of what's happening. So that's kind of my question. Bodhisattvas who have attained the path of seeing, is their sleep virtuous because they're conscious of their sleep? I'm not conscious of what's happening in my sleep. I might remember my dreams, but I'm not conscious. So I'm necessarily dependent on afflictive obscurations during sleep. And so I guess for bodhisattvas, then it would be virtuous. Well, what I understood is that even on the level of an ordinary individual, there can be virtuous mental events that arise during dreaming, even in the presence of afflictive obscurations, and at that moment, then sleep is virtuous. If we dream about bodhisattvas, that can happen. Even if we're not conscious of it, it's still virtuous? What do you mean by conscious? If I'm dreaming about Karmapa, you're saying that this is virtuous, but if I'm not aware that I'm dreaming, then I can't orient my dream, but I'm not conscious that I'm dreaming when I'm dreaming. I can remember my dreams, but I'm not conscious when they're happening. Well, this idea of conscious or unconscious is not exactly present in the same way in Buddhism, at least as far as I understand it, which isn't necessarily the most. In any case, if we go back to what Rinpoche said this morning, we can become more conscious of our functioning by studying these types of texts, and we can better understand how mind functions and seeing how mental events function for us. But then if we try to make this match with psychology notions of conscious and unconscious, I can't really answer a question in that sense, how it functions in relation to Buddhism. In terms of mental events, if there are thoughts, if there are motivations that are virtuous, then at this moment, sleep is virtuous. Whether we're conscious or not conscious isn't said in the context of Buddhism. My impression is that, well, I don't really know. But if the mental event is there's something virtuous that's present. That's my understanding. If there are thoughts and motivations that are virtuous, then sleep will be virtuous, whether we're conscious of these thoughts or not. The other thing that comes to my mind is the disciplines. When we take a discipline of individual liberation, then virtue continues to increase even if we're sleeping. So would that also answer this type of question in a way? That sleep can be virtuous when we have a discipline of individual liberation or another discipline. Virtue is present all the time. But then that's virtue, the vow that makes it that virtue is increasing, but not sleep. But there can be non-virtuous things during sleep. Virtue would be accumulated due to the vows, but if during sleep there are non-virtuous thoughts, the sleep would be non-virtuous. I'm not sure. This makes me think of what Khenpo Chodrak said one day, which is that if when we're falling asleep in the evening and we develop enlightened attitude and we try to orient ourselves toward the Dharma, then sleep can be virtuous. But if we're thinking about lots of things that aren't especially virtuous, then there's more chance that our sleep will be non-virtuous. This is a similar question concerning the 4 variable mental events. I think I understood the examples about regret, which can be virtuous or not, depending on the examples. For sleep, if I understand correctly, if there's a virtuous mental event present, then sleep can be virtuous. Do you have an example for course examination or subtle analysis where that can be virtuous or not? An example that comes to mind is if we try to understand a treatise, such as the entry to the state of a Pandita, then course examination and subtle analysis will be at work. And if we try to understand Mein Kampf, then it'll be less virtuous than if we're working on the entry to the state of the Panditas. It depends on the object of focus, is how I understand it. And also the motivation behind our focus. If we try to understand a work like that, which is very controversial, but our goal is to be able to better understand this kind of thinking, to be able to approach people who have these kind of thoughts and convince them of other things, then maybe it could be virtuous. It depends on the motivation, in fact. It's not just the object. In any case, that's what's said here. It's more based on the motivation, which will determine if it's virtuous or not. I just wanted some clarification. This term that's translated by label, for example, in agitation, pursuing pleasant labels, I don't quite understand the term here. I'd simply say characteristics. Before it was translated as characteristics, but labels is maybe closer to the Tibetan. In fact, we generally use the translation of characteristic for the Tibetan word tseni. Here it's tsenma. So we chose label because the two words are different. It refers to slightly different things, not so different. Coming back to another variable mental event, regret, I understand the two examples of it being virtuous or non-virtuous. What I don't understand is at the end it says it cuts off stability of mind. It seems like that follows with non-virtuous regret, but if it's virtuous regret, I would think that it would add stability of mind rather than cut it off. What I understood is that even if it's virtuous, it agitates the mind. We're ruminating. There is a certain level of discontent. We're not very happy about what we did. We're thinking about it. We think, oh, I should have done something different. And so in this sense, it cuts mind off from stability, from its natural state. It cuts it off from its peaceful aspect. That seems very close to guilt. Maybe? Guilt, there isn't guilt in Buddhism. However, there is consciousness of having accomplished a non-virtuous action in terms of what's defined in Buddhism. And when we accomplish this act, we are connected with lack of shame and lack of restraint. And we go against what the Dharma says. It's not just thinking, oh, I broke the law. It's also that having accomplished this action, we're aware that we're creating suffering for later or for others, and that it's not the path that we've chosen to take or that we wish to take, and we don't want to continue this way, and we think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But it's not the Western meaning of the term guilt or the Judeo-Christian term. It's more recognition of having committed an error. That's a shame, and I should have acted differently. We'll conclude here, unless there's a last question. One more. I'd like to come back to a mental event that was presented yesterday, hypocrisy. Did I understand correctly concerning the fact that it's an afflictive obscuration that will bring about an act of speech? It wasn't said like that, but speech can certainly be involved when we try to trick others by pretending to possess qualities that we don't have, and all of that with the goal of obtaining gains, wealth, respect, etc. So indeed, that can occur via speech, but there can also be things written with the body. Maybe it's trickier. It's harder to pretend to be a great football player if we're not. We can immediately see if we're not. And mind, of course, is involved because we have to think about all that we're going to say. But you agree it's more something that occurs in terms of speech? I suppose, but we can still act using our body to make people believe something. It's not specified here. It seems that it particularly occurs via mind and speech, in my understanding. We'll conclude here. Tomorrow there will be more space for questions.
Sonam di tamshe zipa ni domne nyepe chanam paje ne kega nachi balam chupai sipe tsole jowa jowa shon.